A year or two ago, I was talking with some Disney fans, and one person said they didn't understand why people liked Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I answered, it's not they like him as a person, they like him as a villain. They like to hate him. And with Disney, that happens a lot. You enjoy the villains so much because they are so evil. And the worse a villain is, the more you'll want to root for the hero, the more climactic the ending will be, and the greater you feel when the villain is ultimately defeated. The person was satisfied with my answer and they thanked me. But there is a trend of people who do like Frollo as a person, strangely enough. I have seen art where Frollo is depicted as this kind, old, misunderstood man. And it gets so bizarre because there's fan art of him with Esmeralda as a pairing. They had children together. And I'm not talking about the novel where you sort of get a sympathetic vibe from him. They actually do depict him as from the cartoon, where he's flat out terrible. And that just blows my mind and how absurd that is. And it's mean of me to come down on people's opinions and pairings. But with Frollo, I think if you really like him as a person, you may want to question yourself a little bit. And nowadays, it's actually becoming a really common trend for people to sympathize with villains way more than they should. And let's face it, a lot of it has to do with good looks. This is shallow, but that's the way it is. If Loki, actually no, he's actually one of the greatest examples. Like Loki, Snape, these kinds of people. If they were actually ugly, if God forbid we made them a little chubby or gave them like a face deformity or something, there would be much less sympathy for them. And I will get a lot of people, no doubt, riled up. Probably not a lot of people, let's be real here. But people may say, well, that's not true. I like him for more than his looks. I like him for his backstory. But if you actually take apart the villain's backstory, if you gave it an honest look without trying to imagine their face, I think you would try to see something else. I feel I can't talk about Loki because, thanks to the merger, thanks to the buyout, Disney owns Marvel, so cheating. Loki, yeah, there can be some sympathy for Loki, given how he thought he was something he wasn't. But there came a time very early on when he just decided to stop giving it up. He was willing to put so many people in danger, to kill so many innocent lives for his own pettiness and greed. There is no amount of sympathy, there is no amount of regret that can cover what he's done. There is no going back for him. I sincerely doubt it. And I would be disappointed if the movies tried to do that. He was willing to kill races of people just because he found out he was adopted. And that's terrible, if you think about it. What does that say about people who are adopted? It's from a fantasy point, true, and his race does have little redeeming factors. But again, there were some innocence in the Ice Giants. There were some, and I'm sorry. This is just something I see all too often on my Tumblr dash, with people jumping to defend him. But again, he ruined his own life. He made these choices. He continued to make terrible choices. And this is a factor that works with villains. they will continue to make terrible choices for their own selfishness and greed, and for what they think is right. That's what Loki has in common with Frollo. That's what they have in common with every staple Disney villain. Yes, in this day and age, Loki is a Disney villain. He is a black and white Disney villain. And I would hope that with more movies and more critical thinking, people will realize this, that he's not an innocent person just because he has flowing locks. And it's really something that needs to be applied to all genres, to all forms of media. The sad thing is, if we put ugly people as the villains, that's still setting a terrible example. We're really damned either way. Making ugly villains is stereotyping, but making extraordinarily good-looking villains leads to far more sympathy than they deserve. So it's hard to find a middle point. But I suppose that's where really good storytelling has to come in. There is a limit to how much good storytelling can do, I believe, because will be some people who ignore it flat out just for the favor of a pretty face. Which kind of makes you question why people are pairing Frollo with Esmeralda, because he's not exactly that good looking. But I think ultimately what people want is sympathy for themselves too. Because if they can find sympathy for this awful, terrible killer person, maybe someone could find sympathy in their own lives. Which is sad, and something I actually can relate to as I think about it. But worshipping and playing that much sympathy with someone truly terrible is kind of harmful to you and to others around you. So I think what's required ultimately is for people to take a step back from the favorite villains and see, do you love them because they're villainous, or do you love them because of their character? And the more answers you try to find for yourself, the better off you'll be.